Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Education Commission of the State's webinar series, ECS Live. We're excited about today's topic, exploring innovative policies for strengthening the school leadership pipeline. My name is Tiffany McDowell. For anyone I haven't had the pleasure to meet, it's wonderful to meet you virtually today. I see some old friends and familiar faces as well as new folks on the list today. We're so happy to have you. I'm a policy director here at ECS and glad to be today's MC. For anyone new to ECS, Education Commission of the States was founded through the Interstate Compact for Education with the purpose of being a nonpartisan, non-advocacy mechanism for state leaders to learn from one another, a role that remains as vital today as it was at our creation 60 years ago. On behalf of the entire ECS team, we would like to thank our partners who help make events like this one possible. Thank you so much for your continued support. Before we dive into today's rich content, I want to quickly flag that at the end of the webinar, we will share a short post-session survey and hold a few minutes for you to complete it live. This is part of our commitment to continuous improvement, and we're thankful to partner with the Wasatch Education Group to understand how our webinars are meeting the needs of our audience. We also welcome you to submit questions along the way using the Q&A function. We will hold time for Q&A at the end of today's webinar. With those logistics in mind, let's turn to today's topic, supporting school leaders at the state level. We chose to focus on this topic because the research is clear. School leaders are an essential ingredient in quality schools. They attract and retain great teachers, they influence school climate, and they do so many things that ultimately influence student outcomes. But even though the research is clear that school leaders matter a great deal, state leaders are not always clear on how to best support school leaders. To provide some ideas, today we will explore what we see in the national landscape of state policies around school leadership, why states might focus on school leaders, including a summary of research from our colleagues at Policy Studies Associates, and then how 3 states, Delaware, Kentucky, and Louisiana, are approaching building the leadership pipeline within their states. We're going to introduce the talented group of speakers we have today along the way, and as I mentioned, you'll hear from each of them, and then we'll have some Q&A. But to begin, let me briefly set the stage on the national landscape of state policies for school leaders via ECS's 50-state comparison on school principals. This study was last conducted in 2023 and looks at state policies in 4 areas: professional standards, preparation, certification, and financial incentives. As I move through these findings, I want to note that this study focuses on statute and regulation related to the principalship, so it doesn't cover the full scope of other actions states may be taking that aren't formalized in those aspects of policy. Let's begin with standards. Professional standards represent the policy topic with the most consistency across states, with all 50 states and the District of Columbia requiring principal preparation programs to align with either state or national standards. But how those standards show up in state policy varies slightly. At least 47 states and DC have adopted leadership standards. The remaining states not reflected in those numbers have standards for leadership preparation. Speaking of preparation, our analysis found that at least 39 states require practical experience, such as an internship, residency, or job experience as a part of principal preparation. And at least 23 states in DC require mentorship for new principals. It is worth noting that fewer states require mentorship for new principals compared to state requirements for new teachers. According to a separate ECS body of research, at least 32 states require such support for novice teachers. Now, I'm sure folks on the call recognize that the actual content and implementation of that mentorship is often conducted at the district level. So the lack of state requirements does not necessarily mean that new leaders are not receiving mentorship. Now let's take a look at a few areas where state requirements tend to differ more substantially, particularly in certification and financial incentives. Our 50-state comparison includes data on licensure requirements for new principals and requirements for principals trained out of state. We also studied alternative licensure structures and wanted to highlight this as an area where there's substantial variation across the country. According to our 2023 research, at least 28 states offer some kind of alternative licensure for school leaders, but the specifics of those alternative licensure routes and their requirements varies substantially. We also see quite a bit of a variation when it comes to other roles outside of the principalship. As of 2023, at least 8 states outlined a specific certificate for assistant principals or similar roles with other titles within statute or regulation. As I mentioned, there's quite a bit of variation here in terms of both which roles are outlined in state policy and what the requirements might be for a license. In our estimation at ECS, this is a bit of a policy area to watch as the assistant principal role has become more and more common. In 1990, about 1/3 of schools featured an assistant principal role. By 2015, that was up to about half of American schools, and it seems that the position continues to grow in popularity, along with other support roles within the school building. So this expanded use of the assistant principalship might mean that states are revisiting requirements around certification, licensure, and training. For our last peek at the national landscape, we're going to look at financial incentives. In our 50-state research, we looked for states using financial incentives like salary supplements or bonuses to attract experienced leaders or retain them. At least 7 states offer such a financial incentives in statute or regulation. Again, there may be states that offer those types of bonuses through other mechanisms, and we focused here on statute and regulation. It is important to note that state policy regarding salary for principals varies quite a bit across the country, with only 7 states, and not necessarily these same 7, setting school leader salary schedules at the state level. I would say overall, we see quite a bit less state activity around financial incentives and salary for school leaders as compared to teachers. With that summary of what states are currently doing around school leadership, it's our pleasure to introduce our talented colleagues at Policy Studies Associates to tell us more about why states may choose to invest in school leaders. For this summary, we're glad to feature leading research by Brian Iyer and Molly Rubin. Much of the research they will share today is summarized quite conveniently in the AEFP Live Handbook content on school leaders, which we will add to the chat. With that, Brian and Molly, take it away.
Thanks, Tiffany, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Molly Rubin, and Brian and I are going to spend the next several minutes making the case for something we believe quite deeply, and that is that school principals are among the most powerful levers we have for improving outcomes for students, teachers, and entire school communities. The quote you see here is one we keep coming back to. In 2021, researchers Grissom and colleagues wrote, and I'm paraphrasing slightly, "It's difficult to think of any investment with a higher potential return than a successful effort to improve principal leadership." That's a bold claim, so today we want to address 3 questions. 1, how exactly do principals impact student achievement, teachers, and schools? 2, why is it so urgent to focus on principals right now? And 3, critically, what can states actually do? Because of the role they have, principals shape the experiences of everyone in the school. They influence the school climate, teaching practices, and which teachers stay or leave. In both direct and indirect ways, principals play an important part in improving outcomes for students and teachers. Let's start with the student achievement piece. The research is clear that what principals do day to day influences how students perform. These are concrete behaviors and actions. 4 mutually reinforcing practices stand out. First, principals who hire and retain effective teachers are essentially making long-term investments in every student in the building. A large body of evidence establishes that it's teachers who are the most important in-school factor directly impacting student achievement. Second, principals who focus on instruction, such as conducting classroom observations, giving individualized feedback and coaching, and sitting down with teachers to review data and make a measurable difference. Logically, given that teachers have the largest in-school direct impact on student achievement, The principal's power to drive instruction and improve teacher performance is critical. Third, effective principals design organizational structures that make teaching and learning possible, things like scheduling, resource allocation, and reducing administrative burdens on teachers. And fourth, they invest in high-quality professional learning and foster teacher collaboration, providing the context for teachers to continuously improve in their practice and learn and support one another. A 2025 study by Rogers and Bartanen put it well. They found that educators who view their principals as knowledgeable, supportive, and trustworthy are more likely to report being satisfied with their jobs and to stay in their positions. And this effect is especially pronounced in high-need schools and during moments of crisis or uncertainty. In other words, a highly effective principal is a retention strategy, and in today's environment, that matters more than ever. Effective principals also shape school climate. And that climate touches everyone. School climate shapes the way adults and students interact with and relate to one another. It is marked by trust and a sense of belonging. For students, when they feel safe and like they belong, the data shows real results: higher attendance, better graduation rates, and reduced exclusionary discipline. For teachers, a positive climate means feeling supported, being included in decision-making, and having a shared sense of purpose, not just showing up to execute someone else's vision. And for families, it means being welcomed into the building, having clear lines of communication, and trusting that their children are in good hands. This is the ecosystem that a strong principal builds, and when it's missing, the whole system feels it. Given how important principals are, this is where the picture gets concerning and calls for us to focus on what is happening in the principal workforce. This graph depicts the average attrition, specifically retirement and resignation, reported by school districts, broken out by rural, suburban, and urban locales. This data from the American School District Panel shows that attrition rates climbed during the pandemic, and in all three locales, attrition has started to cool, but has not returned to pre-pandemic levels. And this is particularly prominent in rural areas. But attrition is only part of the story. When you factor in all types of mobility, not just resignations and retirements, but transfers, demotions, terminations, and other departures, about 1 in 5 principals leaves their school every single year. This is a fairly consistent finding over time, whether relying on nationally representative data or state data. And this turnover isn't distributed equally. It hits hardest in lower performing schools, in schools with higher proportions of students receiving free and reduced price lunch, and in schools serving more students of color. A 2024 study by Bartanen and colleagues, using data from Tennessee, Oregon, and New York City, found that a typical principal leads a school for just 3 to 5 years and leaves the principalship altogether after 6 or 7. Years of experience are trending downward over time, and on average, the people filling these principal vacancies have less and less experience in education. So what does all this turnover actually do to students? In the short to medium term, say the first 3 years, the answer is consistent. It hurts. When a principal leaves, test scores tend to drop, and this is what we kind of call a disruptive effect. It makes intuitive sense. There's a period of instability, new leadership priorities, and staff uncertainty. Over the longer term, however, the impact depends on who leaves and who replaces them, the quality of the replacement relative to the quality of who they replaced. This is referenced as the replacement effect. Disruptions are longest when effective principals leave. However, replacing lower performing principals causes only temporary declines. Student achievement recovers to pre-turnover levels within 3 years and ultimately surpasses them. And this is not explained just by teacher turnover. That distinction matters a lot for how we think about leadership development and support. Given all of this and the audience of this presentation, it would be foolhardy to conclude without addressing the crucial question of what can states do. And for that, I will pass the focus to Brian, who speaks from extensive experience as a principal supervisor, and having worked at a state education agency as well. In his current professional chapter, he works with districts and state agencies on leadership preparation, principal quality, and developing leadership pipelines that ensure a robust pool of well-prepared future leaders.
Thanks, Molly. The recent Wallace Foundation report, The Principal Effect, underscores how principals drive student achievement, attendance, discipline, and teacher retention, and the importance of supporting them. There are 4 state actions that can be taken to strengthen the principal preparation and build robust pipelines. First, raise program approval and licensure standards, so preparation requires clinically rich internships, performance-based assessments, and strong university-district partnerships. Second, underwrite the cost of preparation. Fund paid internships, apprenticeships, and service scholarships. States like North Carolina's Principal Fellows or Mississippi's Sabbatical Program are models to look to. Programs that develop strong candidates who can complete intensive clinical training without losing income or taking on debt. Third, build coherent, equity-focused pipelines that recruit and develop diverse teacher leaders early. Create clear pathways from teacher to teacher leader to assistant principal to principal, with recruitment, mentoring, and hiring commitments so high-need schools get prepared leaders. And finally, create district cohorts and fund external facilitators to guide districts through tools like the Principal Pipeline Self-Study Guide to focus on the 7 domains, review evidence, assess the district's needs, create and implement a doable action plan. Our next speaker from Delaware will speak to how this work is being implemented across their state. Combined stronger standards, funded clinical training, deliberate pipelines, and supported district implementation translate into state policy that produces better principals, greater stability, and improved outcomes for students. Building on our previous slide about pipelines, we now turn to the support principals need to succeed and be retained. First, states should systematically collect principal working condition data and report it at district and state level. The supports can be then targeted where they're needed, especially for those high-need schools. Second, train and deploy principal supervisors whose job is instructional coaching and joint problem solving, not just compliance. Expert coaching provided regularly expands principals' instructional leadership capacity. And third, make compensation competitive and stable. Review salaries and possibly add loan forgiveness, housing support, or school-based incentives to attract and retain leaders. And last, set principal stability as an explicit policy goal. Adopt turnover reduction targets, monitor progress, and tie supports to those goals. Together, these steps convert preparation into long-term impact. To conclude, align policy and funding to a scale that works. Use state and ESSA Title I and II funds. Expand HEA Teach style grants to cover principal prep and paid internships. Pilot and scale paid internships in high-need districts. And convene districts and programs to update preparation based on local needs. If you invest strategically, evidence shows you will get stronger and more stable principals, which will ultimately lead to better outcomes for students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian and Molly. And for anyone who submitted a question, thank you. Please keep those coming. But next, it's my pleasure to introduce our first state speaker. We are going to hear from Brandy Fox from the Delaware Department of Education. Brandy, tell us a bit about how Delaware is thinking about supporting school leaders and what you have learned along the way.
Thanks, Tiffany, and thank you, Brian and Molly. My name is Brandy Fox. I thank everyone for the opportunity to be here with you today. I am the Education Associate for School Leadership here at the Delaware Department of Education. And over the next couple of minutes, I'm going to walk you through our approach to building a statewide leadership pipeline, one that is grounded in research, driven by local context, and designed for long-term sustainability. What you're going to see here is that Delaware's work to strengthen leadership pipelines is deeply connected to our statewide strategic plan and our belief that sustainable school improvement requires sustainable leadership systems. It's embedded within two of the building blocks that you'll see starred here to the left of the screen. And all five of these building blocks are part of our strategic plan, but the work we're going to talk about today are really highlighted in two of them. The first is safe and supportive schools with specific priorities around instructional leadership and educator workforce growth and retention. Our strategic plan commits Delaware to guaranteeing skilled leaders who can manage and improve schools effectively. The second building block that you'll see highlighted here is great teaching and learning. The research is unambiguous. Principals are among the highest leverage variables in improving instructional quality at scale, second only to teachers. So investing in leadership pipelines is at its core an investment in the conditions that determine student outcomes. For state leaders considering this work, securing that type of explicit strategic anchoring is foundational. So I thank our Secretary of Education, Cindy Martin, for prioritizing this work and ensuring that our leadership efforts remain anchored in a shared vision. And as she would say, we start with students and build for impact. In Delaware, our leadership development does not begin when an educator pursues an administrative credential. It begins at the point of entry into the profession, and in some respects, even earlier. So you'll see here what you'll see are 7 pipeline stages, each with a dedicated education associate who owns that stage, maintains a defined strategy, and ensures alignment across the continuum. And so some of the things you heard Brian speak about are tied to these different parts of the building blocks for our pipeline. Delaware has made a deliberate policy decision to staff and resource the entire continuum. From early engagement with pre-apprenticeship programs and recruitment through teacher leadership and school leadership. That decision is what distinguishes a pipeline from a collection of unrelated programs. And so our focus today is going to be on school leadership, which you'll see is number 7. But I want you to hold the full picture in your mind as we talk about this process today, because the strength of a leadership pipeline at the right is directly influenced by what is happening at every stage before it. So this slide here you see represents my full portfolio of work within school leadership. And I want you to notice not just the breadth of the components, but their intentional coherence. New leaders in their first year participate in a mandatory induction experience, 7 structured sessions, a portfolio, a year-long mentor, and an opportunity to earn doctoral credits. That commitment to making induction mandatory reflects a policy stance that the first year of leadership is too consequential to leave to chance. Alongside this induction, we have structured mentoring with dedicated stipends. We have a Governor's Institute for School Leadership, those academies for aspiring principals and executive track leaders. We also have our DPAS for administrator evaluation with credentialing, and our Institutions for Higher Education partnerships for preparation program quality assurance, along with superintendent and charter school study councils. This extends our supports into year 2 and 3, which are optional. What I'm going to examine further here is the actual pipeline project for the principal pipeline, through which we partner with districts to examine and strengthen their leadership systems at local levels. A defining feature of our model is our approach it's not just about intuition or organizational preference, but it is really grounded in a substantial and peer-reviewed body of evidence. And we have disciplined ourselves about translating evidence and theory into practice. We have drawn from 4 key bodies of work as we plan out this principal pipeline project. Paul Manna's 2021 analysis examined how state policy can actively support districts in developing comprehensive and aligned pipelines. That provides a framework for conceptualization of appropriate state roles in this process. The Grissom article really synthesizes, with 2 decades of research, how principals affect students. And then the Wallace Foundation Principal Pipeline Self-Study that Brian spoke about earlier, this became our core diagnostic instrument at the district level when we walk leaders through self-studies. Lastly, you're going to see here an article from Goldring from March 25, Implementing for Sustainability. This examines the principal pipeline across 4 districts, and it really validates the work we do. Here in Delaware, we actually were able to partner with the Greenville team that is highlighted in this article. They visited with us during our PLCs with our leaders. They shared their strategies with our cohorts, and we learned and implemented great strategies for sustainability from them. I raise this because research grounding really carries significant policy currency. So when we as state leaders can present to legislature and state boards and governor's offices and demonstrate that the approach we use is validated in over 2 decades of national research, that is really a qualitatively different conversation than just advocating for a great practice. And so Delaware, we are working to build that credibility with intention, and it can be meaningfully something that we use to strengthen our ability to sustain the work over time. What you're going to see here is how we actually begin to use our pipeline project with leaders across the state. The Delaware Principal Pipeline Project is structured around these 4 interconnected components. The work begins with our research grounding, as shared previously. Districts then engage in a structured self-study, examining their own data across 7 pipeline domains with peer review cycles embedded throughout. Critically, principal pipeline work is most effective when led by a cross-functional team that represents key district stakeholders and brings diverse expertise to the effort. A collaborative team structure builds shared ownership, it strengthens stakeholder engagement, and it ensures that the pipeline decisions are aligned with district priorities and long-term leadership needs. And then the data that is generated by and for the district through their self-study is not collected for state reporting purposes. From that diagnostic work, action plans are created and they emerge organically from a local context rather than a prescribed state template. Our core question at this stage is, what additional support does a district need to bring its plan to life? And we support that at the state level. That's our strategic role in facilitation and not compliance monitoring. And finally, continuous improvement is sustained throughout. We use it with ongoing quantitative and qualitative data reviews throughout the process. We do cross-district communities of practice, and then the development of an anchor district in each county to institutionalize the pipeline across the state. And as we said, in our own work here at DOE, we intentionally resist a one-size-fits-all model. The design challenge is holding local context alongside state coherence. So that is something that we work to hold to heart in sustainability. From this, I want to offer 4 lessons drawn from our experience. Candid observations, I believe, that carry relevance for any state that wants to undertake this work. First, we recognize that leadership pipelines require systems thinking. No single program, however well-designed, produces durable change without a true infrastructure to sustain it. Delaware has seen strong programs sustained over time as we embed them in our systems. That way we can carry them forward. We are currently in our 4th cohort of this pipeline work, and we are learning and growing every year. Secondly, district ownership is the most powerful predictor of traction. Action plans that emerge from a district's own diagnostic process generate a fundamentally different level of institutional commitment than those that would be driven by state mandates. The distinction between compliance and ownership is not incidental. It's something that we determine from the beginning. The third lesson we learn is that the cross-district collaboration accelerates learning in ways that the state cannot replicate unilaterally. So when district leaders can share direct experience with their peers and their colleagues, that credibility and applicability is something that sustains the program in a greater way. And fourth, one of the things we also learned from our partnership with Greenville was that sustainability must be planned from the very beginning, not treated as an afterthought. And so that was shared in the 25 Gold Ring article, because we recognize that effective pipelines are sustained through strategic alignment from the beginning, high-level advocacy, infrastructure investments, external partnerships, and continuous data-informed decisions. So as we look here, sustainable work, pipeline work doesn't emerge just from good intentions. It requires real infrastructure. In Delaware, that includes a designated education associate for school leadership. So there is someone in the role that supports this. We work with 4 national coaches that we use title funding to partner with. We have deep district and state level leadership experience. We also support a ratio of 2 to 3 LEAs per coach. And then we hold 3 collaborative facilitated professional learning communities throughout the year for a full day. This is funded through title funding, national partnerships, and then our research base that is anchored in the Wallace work. And so we recognize that this is something that happens not just because one person does it, but because it is a systemic part of our process. I will argue that the more consequential, though, information and transformation is reflected on the right side of the screen, not just in the infrastructure. As we think about the nexus of policy and practice, we had to begin to shift and move deliberately away from traditional state postures where the traditional mandate is just around monitoring and compliance. But we've really shifted to where Delaware convenes and partners with leaders. We build capacity, we build system alignment, we work to sustain and develop across 1 to 3 years, not just a 1-year effort. And then we operate in service to our leaders as coach, facilitator, and strategic support. This next slide is something I wanted to share because all of the policy architecture and system infrastructure we have described ultimately has to manifest in real schools, in real districts with real people. So I wanted to share 2 exemplars of what happens at the end of a 3-year period once they've gone through the self-study, they've looked at the data, we've gone through PLCs and professional learning, and what comes out of that. So one area I wanted to highlight was Newark Charter School. They developed a portrait of a leader, which was a document produced by their equity-centered leadership pipeline team that defines the leadership characteristics and values and competencies to which all leaders are held. The key about this document, though, is that it doesn't just live as a document. It became the driving force for how they recruit, develop, and evaluate leaders. So it became a part of the very systems and structures of their leadership for hiring practices and retaining leaders. The next thing you'll see is here, Woodbridge School District. This year, they launched their Rising Blue Raiders program in February of 2026. It's a locally designed initiative to cultivate future administrators from within their existing staff. That program emerged from their direct participation in the principal pipeline self-study process. They identified a gap in their succession plan. They took ownership of the opportunity and they built a solution grounded in their own context. The leaders in the Rising Start program, they shadow current administrators. It includes leadership projects and mock interviews that simulate what the leaders would experience once they go into that process. And so these 2 examples look different from one another, but that is precisely the point. The pipeline framework provides coherence, but what districts do within that framework should reflect who they are and the students and families that they serve. And so I want to close by turning the lens back to all of us here. Delaware doesn't have this perfectly figured out. We are still learning, still building, still growing. But we have learned that the right questions matter just as much as the right answers. So here are 4 questions I'd invite you to take back to your teams. First, how do we identify future leaders? Is talent identification intentional or strategic and systematic? Second, are our systems developmental or do they feel transactional to our stakeholders? Does professional learning experiences build coherence over time or do they remain disconnected events that do not necessarily accumulate into lasting growth and sustained growth? Thirdly, I would ask, what conditions enable leaders to remain and thrive? Are mentoring and induction and coaching genuinely and durably resourced within our states? And then fourth, what is our state actively doing to help? That is the question I ask myself every day in this role. Are senior leaders publicly signaling that leadership pipelines are strategic priorities? Do our states have a designated leader who supports leadership across the state? Delaware continues to try to strengthen the response to these questions each and every day. Again, we haven't lived this perfectly, but we offer our experience not as a finished model, but truly as an honest account of what it takes to build something that lasts. So I thank you for your time, and I think we will have questions at the end.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandy. Next, we're going to continue our tour of state action by taking a look at Kentucky. We're pleased to be joined by Amanda Ellis, Senior Vice President, Student Access and Success from the Kentucky Council on Post-Secondary Education, and Kelly Foster, Associate Commissioner from the Office of Continuous Improvement and Support at the Kentucky Department of Education. Thank you so much for joining us, Amanda and Kelly. We're excited to hear what you're thinking about and embarking on. I know some new news from the state of Kentucky. So Amanda, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you. Amanda Ellis. I'm the Senior Vice President of Student Access and Success from the Council on Post-Secondary Education. And you're probably wondering, why is she talking about principals? But actually, we co-lead the P20 Council for Kentucky called the Commonwealth Education Continuum. And for several years, our members that range from preschool all the way through workforce, higher education, K-12, business and industry, have had a real focus on teacher quality, teacher retention, and the shortage areas. But in 2023, when we were still getting together to talk about these challenges, the work group that formed voluntarily and under the facilitation of the Urban Schools Human Capital Alliance really wanted to shift their focus into principals. And so we started to do that. And so that's why we're here today to talk a little bit about what we found out and where we want to go in Kentucky. So I won't belabor this slide. Many of you heard it, and I think it's incredible how consistent we all are recognizing the importance of a school leader. And so we've already heard from colleagues earlier about if you could invest in improving the performance of just one adult in your school building, it's investing in the principal because he or she has the absolute power to make a really successful culture and climate or to harm it. And that's not always because they're struggling. It could also be because of the support they need. But you can see that principals and school leadership impact student learning and attendance, as you've already heard about, teacher working conditions. It's huge, improving teacher job satisfaction, reduce teacher turnover. And so we're really looking for retention just as much as we are recruitment. And so we have to look at all parts of the system. So one of the things that we did in the continuum to really start digging in is that we are committed to hearing the voices of Kentuckians across all regions of the state to hear about their lived experiences and challenges. And so our continuum work group, as I said, led by Urban Schools Human Capital Alliance, had a protocol where we conducted focus groups asking veteran principals and aspiring principals what are the greatest challenges? So many of the aspiring principals were assistant principals or teacher leaders who were completing their program. And then we had veteran principals who had been in the role for a few years, several years, and gave their feedback. And so you can see on the screen there were three major challenges. Workforce needs, so generation differences, cultures are different, new educators coming into the field and integrating them with different generations of teachers and perspectives. Burnout is a huge issue, varied skill set and preparation for educators. Many different pathways and things require more support, and the need for more collaboration. Students obviously have needs as well. Lots of mental health concerns with our students. Behavioral challenges have really ramped up, diverse learning needs, and then just the complexity and pace of technology integration. That's just student needs that were elevated through the lens of principals. And then just the education landscape alone, and you've already heard this, but evolving accountability, resource allocation shifts, community engagement, and policy and compliance. How things have changed, they continue to shift, and really balancing and managing all of those things really were found as very challenging situations for our school administrators. So when we went to compare what is needed, so we said, what do you need right now as current principals? And we asked the same questions of what aspiring principals thought that they would need. And so when we did surveys across the state, regardless of rural, urban, whether it was north or south or east or west, there were three top things, and you can see how similar they are of what current principals say that they need. They want an experienced mentor. That is the number one thing. They said, I need a confidant. I need somebody I can think with. And I need time with those people. And Kentucky used to have the Kentucky Principal Internship Program, which would provide mentoring and onboarding really as a brand new school administrator, very similar to what we used to have with our teacher internship program. That was sunset several years ago and no longer funding was provided, but there's a real desire and need for that. Same goes with the time with the mentor, and then additional funding for high needs students and schools. We're really saying we just need more support, more help. And then you can see legal guidance and turnkey tools for staffing, which just really supports of what they had said. And you can see the quotes. We always like to capture individuals who are living this. And so this principal said, being a principal can be typically a very lonely place. Having a mentor or principal accountability person to talk to or even vent to is very healthy in this job. Every day people come to you for answers, insight, thoughts, affirmation, support. It's great and a part of the job, but very rarely do we get to go to people for those same things. Burnout is a very real thing. And I think you saw that earlier with Molly's presentation on the turnover and the shortened number of years in those positions. But what was super interesting around that is that we had assumed that current principals may need something different than aspiring principals. But if you look, the top two are the same. And we were able to interview 50 aspiring principals, and you can see their top at 80%. Really, the top two had a tie, but the top two needs were the same. And that was that experienced mentor and dedicated time. They need somebody to talk to navigate some of the decisions. How do you think through it? Because decisions have to be made so quickly and there's so many moving parts. Practical hands-on experience. They really wanted more than just observation or time to talk, but as they were preparing, more practice, more on-the-job learning. And then legal guidance. That was also a common piece. Where they were just like, we just need to know more about it. Things changed. We're not sure we're making great decisions or we question things. And so we just need to know more. And then you can see additional funding for high needs schools and students. We're still there, just flip-flopped a little bit in the priority. And I think that's super interesting how it's not that different. And so you can see the quote here as well, with the educational landscape is changing rapidly and no one person can know and do everything. But well-trained people with mentors can be highly effective, plus they are less likely to suffer burnout. So again, that concern about burnout, the sense of being overwhelmed and really knowing what to do and how to do it is very important. So what we did with this is we actually took these experiences, and we took the data that was collected, and then of course had used KY Stats data, Kentucky Impact data that was available in partnership with KDE, and produced a report for consideration. And that report was shared by several of our members who represent superintendents and principals, legislators, business and industry, higher education, so on and so forth, as I mentioned before. And it had really resonated with conversations that were already taking place. And there are great promising practices already taking place that Dr. Foster will be able to share with you, and how KDE is going to take on what now is new legislation. And so that is where we have started. There's definitely been an awareness and a need, and we've really started to talk more holistically about the importance of support and growth and capacity building of our district and school leaders, our educational leaders, because the burden is great, the job is important and essential for how it impacts teacher attrition and our overall workforce. So I think I'll turn it over now to Dr. Foster and for you to share where we're going.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Kelly Foster, and I am the Associate Commissioner of the Office of Continuous Improvement Support at the Kentucky Department of Education. And I'm excited to be joining you today to give you a little update on what we're currently doing at the department to support principals, as well as where we are going in the future. So right now, we have several offices that provide different supports to principals, assistant principals. The P3 project, the Principal Partnership Project, that comes out of our licensing office, and it is information around early days of a principalship, how you get started, the things that you need to know to survive that first year that we've all been a part of. And so that has been a program that has gone on for the last several years and been very beneficial to our starting principals. We also, out of my office, offer cognitive coaching and adaptive schools coaching to principals, assistant principals, because it's one thing to have the certification and actually go through the interview process and be offered that first principal position, but then you really need to know how to deal with coaching your teachers, coaching your staff members, and building capacity in them. So those two trainings have been very beneficial over the last couple of years. In 2013, we started a partnership with the National Institute for School Leaders, and we train 100 to 150 principals, assistant principals, aspiring principals, and also district level staff each year in that National Institute for School Learning curriculum. And what has made that so successful over the years is that we use their curriculum, and we have Kentucky educators that are trained facilitators, and then we kind of Kentuckyize it. Whatever's going on in the landscape across the state, we also incorporate into the national evidence-based curriculum. So if something is going on in the legislature, or new laws are happening, or new requirements, they're getting an extra dose of that through their initial training. And then we also have instructional leadership coaches based on some legislation in Kentucky around literacy and math that are working directly with principals and helping them be better instructional leaders around the standards, as well as high quality instructional resources. Now, moving forward, we have lots of things in the works. And so maybe in a year from now, I can come and give you an additional update. But Senate Bill 4, which was passed in our session that just ended in April, deals with a new principal training program. And we are extremely excited to finally have something back in statute. Amanda mentioned earlier, we had the principal, it was called KPIP. And when I was a principal, I went through that program. Amanda did as well. You had a university level mentor, as well as someone else that was currently serving as a principal or a central office employee that served as your mentor. So you had, daily support. And we don't have that right now across our state due to legislative cuts over the years with funding. So we are excited for this new program. I actually just today posted a position. So I'll walk you through what the law says, and then I'll kind of tell you where we are currently and where we hope to go. So the legislation calls for a 4-year principal training program for all new principals, and this will actually start with principals in Kentucky July 1 of 27. So we are very grateful that the legislature gave us a planning year, so that's what we're currently working on, getting ready to roll this out July 1 of 2027. So year 1 and year 2 in the law says that the Kentucky Department of Education will design that curriculum. And so we will focus heavily on the PSEL standards, and we will also be working with higher ed. We will also be bringing in current principals, aspiring principals, superintendents, other agencies across the state that help support educators to find out what it is that we really want our principals to know, to be able to do, what their core values are, and to ensure that they have a common language across the state. It doesn't matter if you're serving in a small rural area or if you're in one of our larger, more urban districts. So KDE will design that program and roll that out for year 1 and year 2. Year 3, a leadership program developed in partnership with the Kentucky Chamber Foundation is what the principal would participate in year 3. And then in year 4, there will be a list of trainings that the Kentucky Department of Education has approved. And the legislature was very specific in that they want those to be high-level leadership trainings. So different organizations in Kentucky could submit their training, their curriculum to the department, and there would be a list that principals could choose from. We did not receive the initial funding amount for all 4 years right now. We do have money for year 1 and year 2. In Kentucky, our legislative cycle during the long sessions, that's when the budget is looked at. So we just had a long session and we just had a budget year and received dollars for year 1 and year 2. And then in 2 years from now, in 28, will be a budget session again. So hopefully when 28 rolls around, we will be able to secure funding for year 3 and year 4 of the program. But once again, we are I'm sorry.
I'm so sorry. I hate to cut you off. I was just going to let you know we're going to need to wrap up to move on to hear from Louisiana. So if you have a last little comment you want to leave it with.
That's it. That's
okay.
All. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you. I'm so sorry to cut you off. Kevin, we're so happy to have you bring us home here. We'd love to hear a bit about what you and your colleagues at the Louisiana Department of Education are taking on for your leadership pipeline.
Wonderful. Thank you for having me. And knowing that I have the unenviable task of going last and running out of time, I'm going to talk quickly. Please feel free to email me with any questions y'all might have. So we worked on building out our pipeline, and much like our peers, we started by focusing on what we did know about the state of education within Louisiana, and particularly leadership. So when we started with what we did know, we could go to that next slide. Yeah. What we did know was that that training is good when it comes to preparation for leaders, but much like teachers, they need practical experiences. So we need to get them in front of students and teachers as often as possible. But what we're doing is working because we have made progress in growing our students. Our 4th grade readers, depending on which report card you want to look at, our 4th grade readers jumped to 16th from 50th in 5 years. We're the only state to surpass our 2019 pre-pandemic levels. We've also ranked first in reading growth for reading, and second for math. And then for our disability and economically disadvantaged students, they're outperforming the national average. And then we have to keep bragging that we're only one of the 14 states to post gains in 8th grade math. So we know that what we're doing is working. And we also know what our data says about the state of the principalship. So when you look at this chart that's going to show up on the screen, what you'll see, and what I want to draw your attention to, is that last column, which basically says if we hired 100 principals today, only 57 would be here at this time next year. And of those, within 2 to 5 years, only 44. You can see we're losing a drastic number of our principals. And this led to 3 big takeaways that really drove the work that we are trying to do. So I know I'm talking fast. I'm talking faster than they can click. So here's our big 3 takeaways that we took from that chart. First of all, we're approaching a leadership cliff. 69% of all leaders in Louisiana have at least 15 years of experience. And based upon that turnover rate, we have a lot of work to do, because 3 out of every 5 principals hired leave before making it to year 6. But if they make it to year 6, they're likely to stay almost to year 21. And so it's really that early support that they need, and then we can continue to grow them as it takes to build out our pipeline. But knowing that, it also forced us to ask questions of what we didn't know. And what we didn't know was why our principals were leaving. We didn't know how to always leverage what we have as a state agency when we are a local controlled state. How do we balance that? How to leverage successful leaders within the field. And then we didn't know what we were missing in terms of opportunities to expand development. And that really led to us developing a full image of what our pipeline was and all of the places we could offer support. So when we started looking at our pipeline, we started with the end in mind. We started by looking at long-term success. Oh, well, excuse me, I'm getting ahead because I'm trying to finish it all. But that's what we didn't know. We did research that. I will skip this next slide about what we did learn, because it's the same thing that our peers said, that principals have fear of isolation, the lack of belief, and that we could address them through our work. So if you go to that last slide, I will go through our pipeline. And so we started with long-term success, because that's the goal that we always have for our principals. And we knew that to have long-term success, they really needed to have early career success to want to stay in the position as long as they could. And research has borne out that the best way to have early career success is to have that pre-career success. So when we started building out our pipeline, we started with programs directly aligned to our pre-career success, and 2 programs in particular. We have our Alternative Pathway 4 boot camp. That's the one at the top. And that is for people who are aspiring to become certified leaders. There's some special things that go along with that. And then our Aspiring Principal Fellowship. These are people who are certified to become leaders, but yet not yet in that position. And we give them a year-long support. They visit other capable school leaders, and they get really intimate, detailed support at their level where they are personally. So knowing that we had pre-career success, more balance there, supporting them, we moved to our early career success, and we developed a program called the Novice Principal Academy. It's for any principal within their first 3 years. They get assigned a one-on-one mentor. That mentor goes to them for every cohort that we have, every meeting that we have, but more importantly, they meet with their mentor at least monthly. They visit their mentor's school. Their mentor visits their school, and they get their individual needs met at that personal level, which is going to be key to all of this. And how do we do that? Well, we leveraged our long-term success, and we identified those principals who get identified as semifinalists for Principal of the Year, finalist, all of those different things. We've leveraged them to become our mentors. They've documented success in some of the hardest schools. They've documented success with some of the hardest cases. And so let's have them sitting next to these people who are aspiring to reach that level, so that they can really become what we're looking for out of all of our principals. But this led to a massive hole, and this is one of the things we're just releasing this year, is how are we going to help our principals with long-term success? And with that, we got our title, PACE, Principals Aspiring for Career Excellence. And we call it a banner because within this banner, we actually have multiple opportunities for support. Within it, we have newsletters that focus on the broad spectrum of what principals need to know. And then we also do content-specific, skills-based turnkey training within our newsletters to help really guide them. We do 4 to 6 webinars a year, content-specific, with opportunities for development. We visit our mentor principals' campuses where they host principals only to really guide and support them and build out what it took to develop some of the successful programs they've implemented. And then finally, we have affinity cohorts where we're pairing groups of principals together and giving them leadership training. Leadership training that's open to anyone, business, schools, whatever, but it's really focused in on our principals, where they're learning how to have those difficult conversations, how to recruit and retain staff. Because if they're not doing it, it doesn't matter how good the state is, it doesn't matter how good their individual systems are, the principals are going to be the place where people either decide to stay as a teacher or leave. And so they need support with those things. And so we really feel confident that we've built out a whole pipeline for all of our principals to feel successful and to leverage the success they're having for future success of our schools. And I think that's about as fast as I could go.
Kevin, you did a tremendous job. Thank you so much. And thank you to each of our speakers here today. We're so appreciative of the work you're leading in your states, but also of the time you took to share it with us and with our audience today. With that, we want to go ahead and launch our survey here as we close out. If you could, we'd appreciate you taking just a moment to tell us about this experience and if it met your needs. Again, a thank you to Wasatch Education Partners for their partnership in our surveys and evaluations. Thank you so much for all of the insights that you brought to us today, to our speakers. If this content fires you up and you're excited about state education policy, we hope you'll join us this summer in Washington, D.C. for our National Forum on Education Policy, where we will continue the conversation about state actions to support school leaders, amongst many other topics. We do sell out every year, so please go ahead and register and secure your spot. You can reach out to Caitlin Dennis, our event manager, if you have any questions about our National Forum or any other ECS events. And if you have questions about today's content, if you'd like me to put you in touch with one of our wonderful speakers to learn more about their states, you can reach out to me directly. My email address is included here. I know each of our states and our colleagues at Policy Studies Associates would be happy to answer your questions and continue the conversation. As always, today's session will be recorded and shared in your post-event email and made available on ECS's YouTube page for viewing. With that, I want to say thank you to everyone and have a wonderful day.